She didn't know why she still hoped. Hope was a foolish, fragile thing, a wildflower trying to grow in the cracks of a dungeon floor. It had no place here, in the cold shadow of her family's ambition. The invitation had been a mistake, a clerical error. A single, crisp piece of parchment bearing her name, Ilara, instead of her sister's. For one breathtaking afternoon, it had felt like a key, a chance. Now, standing before the colossal oak doors of the royal palace, that key was about to be snatched away. The air was sharp with the scent of pine from the decorative wreaths and the cloying, expensive perfumes of the arriving nobility. Crystal chandeliers, visible through the towering arched windows, dripped honeyed light onto the marble floors within. Music, a faint, elegant waltz, bled into the winter night, a promise of a world she could only observe. Alara clutched her thin wool cloak tighter. It was a drab gray, a stark contrast to the jewel-toned silks and velvets that swept past her. She was a moth that had wandered into a gathering of butterflies. Her mother, Lady Isolde, turned, her face a mask of cold fury, her lips a thin, disapproving line. "What are you doing, dawdling? You are here for one reason, to ensure your sister's presentation to the king is flawless, not to stand about gaping like a commoner." "I have an invitation, mother," Alara whispered, the words tasting like ash. She held out the parchment. Her own name was written in elegant, flowing script. Seraphina, her sister, laughed. The sound was not joyful. It cut sharper than any blade. She was beautiful, a vision in emerald green silk that shimmered like a serpent's scales. Her golden hair intricately coiled with pearls. An invitation? Oh, you poor delusional thing. Do you really think anyone would invite you? She snatched the parchment from Alara's trembling fingers. The paper, which had felt so heavy with possibility, was feather-light in Seraphina's grasp. "This was meant for me," Seraphina declared, her voice loud enough for the nearby guards to hear. "A simple mix-up. My name is so much more fitting for such an occasion." "But it says Alara," Alara insisted, her voice barely audible over the carriage wheels crunching on the gravel drive. "Does it?" Seraphina's smile was a knife wrapped in silk. With a flick of her wrist, she ripped the invitation in half, then in half again. The pieces of paper, bearing the fragments of Alara's name, fluttered to the cold stone at her feet. It was gone. The one small chance, the one error that might have let her inside, was destroyed. "There," Seraphina said, dusting her hands as if ridding herself of filth. "No more confusion. Now stay out here. Wait with the other servants. We will send for you if your dreary little face is required for anything." Lady Isolde gave a curt nod of approval. "Do not cause a scene, Alara. You have already done enough to embarrass this family." They swept past the guards who averted their eyes and through the grand doors, swallowed by the warmth and light and music. Alara was left alone in the cold. Humiliation burned hot behind her eyes, but she refused to let the tears fall. Crying was a luxury, a weakness her mother had trained out of her long ago. She kept her spine straight, her chin held high, a silent act of defiance against the crushing weight of her own invisibility. The pieces of her name lay scattered on the ground, already being scuffed by the boots of valets and guards. She was nothing. A ghost in her own life, a footnote in her family's story. She stared at the closed doors, the barrier between her world and theirs. She had learned to survive, not to live. And tonight, survival meant standing in the biting wind, waiting for a summons that might never come. From a high, shadowed balcony, he watched it all. King Theron had already refused 17 noble daughters tonight. He had listened to their father's fawning praise and their mother's thinly veiled negotiations. He had endured their simpering smiles and hollow compliments. Each one was a variation of the same gilded trap, a beautiful cage he was expected to step into for the good of the kingdom. He was weary, a weariness that went bone deep, a product of years spent navigating a court of sycophants and schemers. He was the Alpha King, the most powerful man on the continent, and he had never felt more alone. He had retreated to the balcony for a breath of clean, cold air, away from the suffocating press of the ballroom. Below, in the courtyard, the last of the guests were arriving. His eyes, the color of storm clouds, scanned the crowd without interest, until he saw her. She was standing apart from the others, a small, still figure in a plain gray cloak. A moth, he thought, among the garish butterflies. But there was a light in her, a quiet, resilient glow that the darkness could not extinguish. He watched as the woman in green, her beauty as sharp and cold as ice, confronted her. He could not hear the words, but he saw the cruelty in her posture, the arrogance in her laugh. He saw her snatch the paper and tear it to pieces. He saw the flicker of pain in the gray moth's eyes, a pain she quickly masked with a dignity that was more regal than any crown. While the others swept inside, she remained, alone, unbroken. Something shifted inside him. It was not logic. It was not reason. It was a primal, undeniable pull, a thread of fate tightening around his soul. He had spent his life surrounded by people who wanted something from him, his power, his name, his wealth. But this woman, standing in the cold with the scraps of her name at her feet, wanted nothing. She simply endured. He felt it then. A sensation so foreign he almost didn't recognize it. A feeling of being seen, even as he was the one watching. It was as if his lonely, guarded soul had found its counterpart in her quiet strength. The air thickened, charged with a sudden, potent energy that seemed to flow directly from him to her. A prickling on his skin, a warmth spreading through his chest. The guards at the main door straightened as he descended the grand staircase, their faces etched with shock. The king never greeted guests. He never left the dais during the solstice gala. The crowd in the grand hall parted for him like a tide receding from the moon. Whispers followed him, silk gowns rustling with speculation, but he heard none of it. His focus was singular, absolute. He pushed open the heavy oak doors himself, letting the cold night air rush into the overheated hall. And there she was, still standing exactly where her family had left her, her gaze fixed on the doors that had just opened for her. Close enough now. He could see the faint silver of her eyes, wide with shock. He could see the stubborn set of her jaw. He could see the strength she thought was invisible. He walked toward her, each step deliberate, closing the distance between their two worlds. The guards flanking the entrance were frozen, unsure of what to do. The king was outside, in the cold, approaching a woman who was clearly not a noble guest. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. The king, the Alpha King, Theron, was walking directly toward her. He was taller than she had imagined, broader. Dressed in midnight blue velvet that absorbed the light, he was a figure of quiet, immense power. Not a king of glittering gold, but of shadow and substance. He stopped a mere foot away from her. His eyes, a piercing gray, met hers, and she felt the world fall away. It was as if she were the only person in the entire kingdom. He truly saw her. "They tore your invitation," he said. It was not a question. His voice was deep, a low rumble like distant thunder, like gravel wrapped in velvet. Alara found her own voice, surprised it didn't tremble. It was only paper. A flicker of something. Surprise? Admiration? Crossed his features. He looked down at the scattered pieces on the ground, then back to her face. Paper can be a powerful thing. It can grant entry, or it can deny it. "It seems its purpose was denial tonight," she replied, a strange calm settling over her. What more could they do to her? In the presence of the king himself, her family's petty cruelty seemed distant and small. "What is your name?" he asked, his gaze intense, unwavering. She hesitated for a fraction of a second. A name they would prefer you did not know. This time, the corner of his lips tilted upward, a ghost of a smile that transformed his stern face. It was the honesty. He heard it in every word she spoke. In a world of carefully constructed lies, her truth was a beacon. Then it is a name I am most eager to learn, he said softly. Ilara. She said it clearly, reclaiming it from the scattered scraps on the stone. Ilara, he repeated, the name sounding different in his voice. Not plain, not forgettable. It sounded like a promise. They were wrong to leave you out here. He extended his hand. It was a large hand, unadorned by rings save for a single, heavy silver signet on his index finger. It was a hand that could command armies, sign treaties, or break a man. Yet it was offered to her with a gentleness that made her breath catch. Come with me, he said. It was not a request. It was a gentle command, an offer of escape. She looked at his outstretched hand, then back at his face. This was madness. A dream. But the cold stone beneath her thin slippers was real, and the warmth radiating from him was real. For the first time in her life, someone was choosing her. Hesitantly, she placed her small, cold hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, strong and warm. A current of energy, of pure, undiluted life, flowed into her, chasing away the chill that had settled deep in her bones. He did not lead her back toward the grand doors where the entire court was now watching in stunned silence. Instead, he guided her to a small, unassuming side door she had never noticed before. With his other hand, he pushed it open, revealing a quiet, torch-lit corridor. You will not enter as a servant, he said, his voice low and for her ears only. You will enter on my arm, as my guest. He led her not into the thrumming heart of the gala, but away from it. The sounds of music and conversation faded, replaced by the soft echo of their footsteps on ancient stone. The corridor opened into a vast, silent space, a place of peace and solitude, a glass conservatory. Moonlight streamed through the high domed ceiling, illuminating a forest of exotic plants. The air smelled of night-blooming jasmine and damp earth. In the center, a small stone bench sat beside a trickling fountain. It was a secret world, a sanctuary hidden within the palace walls. He led her to the bench and finally released her hand, though the warmth of his touch lingered on her skin. They were cruel to you, he stated, his gaze searching her face in the pale light. Ilara wrapped her arms around herself, a familiar, protective gesture. They are my family. It is their way. It is not a way I will tolerate, he said, the steel returning to his voice. He looked at her hands, still red from the cold. He chafed them gently between his own, his touch surprisingly tender. Why did you not fight back? Why did you simply accept it? The question hung in the fragrant air between them. No one had ever asked her that before. She was expected to be quiet, to be compliant. Fighting them gives them a victory of another kind, she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. It gives them my anger. It gives them my tears. All I have left to keep for myself is my silence. He stopped rubbing her hands, but he did not let them go. He simply held them, his thumbs stroking the backs of her knuckles. You are not invisible, Ilara. I saw you. I saw your strength. Tears pricked her eyes again, but this time they were not born of humiliation. They were from this sudden, shocking validation. A man of his stature, a king, had seen value in her where her own blood saw none. Why? She asked, the word escaping before she could stop it. Why are you doing this? I am nobody. His grip tightened, a fierce, possessive gesture. Do not ever say that, he commanded, his voice dropping to a low growl. You are not nobody. You stood against their storm and did not bend. In a hall full of people who would sell their souls for a moment of my attention, you stood in the cold and asked for nothing. You are the only person here who is not wearing a mask. To me, that makes you everything. She stared at him, at the raw sincerity burning in his storm-gray eyes. He truly meant it. This powerful, intimidating man saw her as everything. The idea was too vast to comprehend. A sudden, terrifying thought struck her. She had seen the sigil on his ring, but had been too overwhelmed to process it. The dire wolf, the crest of the royal line. He wasn't just a lord or a duke. You are the king, she breathed, the realization landing with the force of a physical blow. She tried to pull her hands away, to curtsy, to do something, anything. To correct the impossible breach of protocol she had just committed. He held her fast. My name is Theron, and yes, I am the king. Does that frighten you? She swallowed hard. The gulf between us. It is an ocean, Your Majesty. There is no gulf, he said, his voice softening once more. Not between us. I have been searching for something real in a world of illusion. Tonight, I found it. I found you. He lifted one of her hands and brushed his lips against her knuckles. The touch was electric, a brand of warmth and promise that seared its way straight to her soul. He was dismissing the chasm of their stations with a single, intimate gesture. Now, he said, rising to his feet and pulling her gently up with him. I believe you have a gala to attend. Fear, cold and sharp, lanced through her. No, I cannot. My dress, my family, they will do nothing. Theron interrupted, his voice laced with absolute authority. You will be on my arm. You are under my protection. Let them try. He offered her his arm again. This time she took it without hesitation. Her simple gray wool brushed against his royal blue velvet, the moth and the king. As they walked back toward the sounds of the party, she felt not like a servant, but like a queen. The moment they stepped through the main archway into the ballroom, a hush fell over the assembly. Hundreds of conversations died. The orchestra faltered, the last notes of the waltz hanging in the air like dust motes in a sunbeam. Every eye was on them, on King Theron, the aloof, unapproachable monarch, and the unknown woman in a servant's dress clinging to his arm. Ilara's courage wavered. She could feel the weight of their stares, the daggers of their judgment. She was an imposter, a stain on this perfect, glittering world. Theron must have felt her tremble, because he leaned closer, his voice a warm whisper against her ear. Breathe, Ilara, look at me. They do not matter. She lifted her gaze to his and found his gray eyes fixed on her, a shield against the world. He was right. In that moment, only he mattered. Then she saw them. Her mother and sister stood near the grand fireplace, their faces a mixture of disbelief and pure, unadulterated rage. Seraphina's emerald dress seemed to spit venomous light. Lady Isolde recovered first. With the honed instinct of a predator, she began to move toward them, her smile a brittle, painted-on thing. Seraphina followed in her wake, her expression one of utter fury. Your Majesty, Lady Isolde said, executing a flawless curtsy. Her eyes, however, were locked on Ilara, cold and sharp. You have found our clumsy little ward. How kind of you to return her. Ilara, come here at once. You have caused enough of a spectacle. She reached out to grab Ilara's arm, to reassert her authority, to drag her back into the shadows where she belonged. Before her fingers could even touch the wool of Ilara's sleeve, Theron moved. It was a subtle shift, but it placed him squarely between Ilara and her mother. His hand covered Ilara's on his arm, a gesture of unmistakable possession. She will not be going anywhere, Theron said. His voice was no longer the soft, intimate murmur from the conservatory. It was the voice of a king. It was cold, hard, and resonant with power. It cracked through the ballroom's silence like a whip. Lady Isolde's hand froze in midair. "Your Majesty, there has been a misunderstanding," she began, her composure starting to crack. "She is our daughter, a simple, troubled girl. She is not meant for—" "I know exactly what she is," Theron cut in, his eyes like chips of flint. "I also know exactly what you are." He turned his head slightly, his voice rising to address the entire silent watching court. "Tonight, I witnessed a display of cruelty so profound it beggars belief. I saw this woman," he gestured to Lady Isolde, then to Serafina, "and her daughter tear up Alara's invitation and cast her out into the cold. They left her there, humiliated and alone, for no reason other than their own vanity and malice." A collective gasp swept through the room. Lady Isolde's face went pale. Serafina looked as though she had been slapped. "They sought to make her feel worthless," Theron continued, his voice ringing with righteous fury. "They sought to render her invisible, but they failed." He turned his full attention back to Alara, his expression softening, his voice becoming a vow for all to hear. "She is not worthless. She is invaluable. She is not a servant to be commanded. She is a treasure to be cherished." He looked directly at Lady Isolde and Serafina, and the full force of his royal authority descended upon them. "From this moment forward, Ilara is under my personal protection. She is my chosen guest. She is to be afforded every courtesy and respect due to one who holds my favor. An insult to her is an insult to the crown. A slight against her is an act of treason. Is that understood?" The silence in the room was absolute. Lady Isolde and Serafina stood frozen, their social standing shattered, their cruelty laid bare for all to see. They were ruined. In a single, devastating speech, the king had destroyed them. Serafina made one last desperate attempt. "But Your Majesty, you don't know her. She is nobody. Her bloodline is weak, her dowry non-existent." Theron's response was a cold, dismissive laugh. "I care nothing for bloodlines or dowries. I care for strength, for honor, for truth. Qualities you and your mother so sorely lack." He then turned back to Alara, ignoring the two women as if they had ceased to exist. He cupped her face with his free hand, his thumb gently stroking her cheekbone. The eyes of the entire court were upon them, but Alara saw only him. "I told you there was no gulf between us," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. And then, in front of the silent, shocked nobility, in front of her humiliated family, King Theron lowered his head and kissed her. It was not a chaste, polite kiss. It was acclaiming. It was fierce and deep, and full of the promise of 1,000 moonlit nights in the conservatory. It was the taste of jasmine and strength and belonging. It sealed his words, branding her as his, erasing a lifetime of invisibility with a single, breathtaking act. When he finally broke the kiss, the ballroom erupted in a wave of frantic, excited whispers. The world had been turned on its axis. Alara's old life was over. Her new one had just begun. Later, after the court had been dismissed in a flurry of confusion and gossip, he led her to his private chambers. They were a world away from the gilded opulence of the ballroom. A massive stone fireplace crackled, casting a warm glow over walls lined with books and maps. It was a room of substance, of work and thought, much like the man himself. The emotional weight of the evening finally settled upon Alara. She stood by the fire, her borrowed cloak now feeling like a costume from a play that had ended. She was trembling, not from cold, but from the sheer, overwhelming magnitude of it all. Theron came to stand beside her, his presence a solid, reassuring warmth. He removed her damp cloak, draping it carefully over a chair, then wrapped a heavy, fur-lined robe around her shoulders. It smelled of cedar and him. You are safe here, he said softly. What you did? She began, her voice shaking. You destroyed them. I exposed them, he corrected gently. Their own actions destroyed them. I merely held up a mirror. She looked up at him, her silver eyes filled with a mixture of awe and fear. But why? Why me? He took her hands in his again, leading her to a pair of worn leather armchairs by the fire. He sat opposite her, his knees almost touching hers, his focus entirely on her. Ilara, for 10 years, I have been king. For 10 years, I have been surrounded by people who want to use me. They see the crown, not the man. They offer me their daughters like broodmares. They flatter me with lies. They smile while they plot. It is a lonely, exhausting existence. He leaned forward, his expression raw with a vulnerability she never would have expected from him. I have been searching for someone, authentic. Someone whose spirit hasn't been corrupted by ambition or greed. Someone strong enough to stand in their own truth. His gaze was so intense it felt like he was looking directly into her soul. Tonight, I looked down from my balcony, ready to endure another meaningless night, and I saw you. I saw them try to break you, and I saw you refuse to shatter. In that moment, my search was over. I knew. You knew, she whispered. How could you know? My soul recognized yours, he said, the words simple yet profound. It is a bond I cannot explain, only that I know it to be true. I have felt more alive, more real, in the past hour with you than I have in the last decade on the throne. She wanted to believe him. Every broken piece of her heart yearned to believe him. But the voice of her mother, of a lifetime of being told she was worthless, was a persistent, ugly whisper in her mind. I am afraid, she confessed. I don't know how to be this person, the person you claim me to be. I am just Alara. Just Alara is the woman I have been waiting for, he said with unwavering certainty. He reached out, tucking a stray strand of her simple brown hair behind her ear. His touch was reverent. I am not just offering you my protection for a night, Alara. I am offering you my life, my home, my heart. He paused, his gray eyes burning with sincerity. I am offering you a future, not as my guest, but as my wife, as my queen. The breath left her body in a rush. Marriage, queen. The words were too big, too bright. They belonged in fairy tales, not in the life of a girl whose invitation had been torn at the door. He saw the panic in her eyes, and his expression softened. I know it is sudden. I will not rush you. All I ask is that you stay. Stay here, in the palace, where you are safe. Let me show you that you are everything I say you are. Let me earn the right to stand beside you. He wasn't demanding, he wasn't commanding, he was asking. The most powerful man in the kingdom was asking her. And in that moment, the last of the fear melted away, replaced by a tentative, wondrous hope. A wildflower, finally finding a place to bloom in the sun. I will stay, she said, her voice clear and strong, and his smile, a true radiant smile, was brighter than all the chandeliers in the world. 3 months later, the morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the royal library, illuminating swirling dust motes that danced in the golden light. The air smelled of old paper, leather, and beeswax. It was Alara's favorite scent in the world. She was not wearing gray wool. She was dressed in a simple but elegant gown of deep blue, the color of a twilight sky. Her hair was no longer pulled back in a severe bun, but fell in soft waves over her shoulders. She stood before a large wooden table, her fingers, stained with a touch of ink, carefully tracing the faded illustration of a medieval manuscript. She was not idle. Theron had discovered her hidden talent for art, a skill her family had dismissed as a frivolous waste of time. He had immediately put her in charge of the restoration of the library's most ancient and fragile texts. Here, her quiet patience and meticulous eye were not just valued, they were celebrated. The royal scholars, initially wary, now sought her opinion with genuine respect. Her name was spoken with admiration in the halls of the palace, not because of the king's favor, but because of her own merit. A pair of strong arms wrapped around her from behind, and a familiar chin rested on her shoulder. She didn't startle. She leaned back into the solid warmth of Theron's embrace, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "What marvel are you saving today?" he murmured, his voice a low rumble against her ear. "A bestiary from the First Age," she replied, her voice soft with contentment. "The illuminations are breathtaking. Look at this griffin. The artist used real gold leaf." He watched her for a moment, his gaze filled with a love so profound it was a tangible presence in the room. Her laughter, which he now heard daily, was a bright, beautiful sound that had chased the last of the shadows from his own soul. She had brought life and color not just to the old books, but to his entire world. A royal page entered the library, bowing low. "Your Majesty, Your Grace, a letter has arrived." He held out a silver tray. On it was a single, slightly crumpled envelope. Alara recognized the spidery, aggressive handwriting immediately. It was from Seraphina. Theron's jaw tightened. "Burn it." "No," Alara said quietly. "It's all right. I should read it." He nodded, his protective instinct warring with his respect for her agency. She took the letter. Her hands did not tremble. She broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet of paper. It was a pathetic, rambling screed. It blamed their parents, their station, the king's unreasonable temper. It was full of excuses and self-pity, with a single half-hearted apology buried in the third paragraph. It ended with a plea for Alara to speak to the king on their behalf, to restore some small part of their family's lost honor. 3 months ago, this letter would have wounded her. It would have dredged up a lifetime of pain and inadequacy. Now she read it with a distant, clinical pity. The words were from a different world, a different life. They belonged to a ghost. She folded the letter neatly and placed it on the edge of the table. She would not burn it, but she would not answer it either. It was a relic of a past that no longer had any power over her. She was not a tool for their redemption. She was the architect of her own future. "What did it say?" Theron asked, his voice carefully neutral. "It said goodbye," Alara replied, turning back into his arms and resting her head against his chest. She could hear the steady, strong beat of his heart. Her home. He held her tightly, understanding perfectly. He pressed a kiss to the crown of her head. "I love you, Alara, my brilliant, beautiful queen." She tilted her head back, her silver eyes shining with a love that mirrored his own. "And I love you, Theron, my king." He lowered his head and kissed her, a slow, tender kiss full of shared sunrises and quiet understanding. It was not a kiss of claiming, but a kiss of equals, a promise of a lifetime of mornings just like this one, filled with purpose, peace, and a love that had turned the invisible girl into an invaluable woman, not just to him, but finally to herself.